Hi, Jamie.
Hey, Shadab, how you doing? Finally see the
Yeah.
sun today, by the way.
Yeah, that is true. Yesterday was amazing, right? We were actually playing tennis. It was sunny. I had my sunscreen on. And then suddenly, within 15 minutes, it was a huge storm. And the trees were uprooted and the street lights were literally, like claps in the street. Unbelievable turnaround.
So that right up my alley.
Yes, it is. I wish you had predicted that, Jamie.
Yeah.
Um, but anyway, let's talk about what did Andy Jassy mentioned in his article, which kind of went viral, and there were a lot of talks about it because it mentioned about the impact of AI on the job.
Cool. Yeah, and we'll get into some things that MIT is looking at on how to leverage language models that learn from itself.
And lawmakers are not giving up, okay? They keep trying. Now, this time, New York State is trying to actually pass a law to hold frontier AI labs accountable and prevent AI fueled disasters.
And as we did in a couple of the past episodes, we'll continue doing our rapid fire news roundup, and we have a bunch of things today from OpenAI to Google, and also some things from Amazon.
Midjourney is catching up. They launched their first AI video model.
And Microsoft is pushing the envelope on quantum computing with a 4D quantum computing error correction, as well as some other interesting news around sovereign computing from Microsoft.
And finally, we'll talk about Company of the Week, which we haven't talked about in a while, but this week we'll talk about Scale AI, how the data labeling powerhouse fuels cutting edge models, and why Meta paid $14.3 billion for its stake.
Yeah, I was about to say, Scale AI has been in the news quite a bit
It
this
really
last
scale.
couple of weeks. So
Okay,
all that, yeah, I was going to say all that and more. So stay tuned.
greetings. Welcome to the AI Files podcast. If you're looking to stay up to date on the AI, this is the podcast for you. I'm Shadab Hussain. I'm the director of AI at Microsoft, and I'm your co-host.
Hello, everybody. Jamie Basilico, as you know already. I'm the other co-host here for the AI Files. My day job is a data and AI technical specialist and architect. And as a reminder, please note this is not an official Microsoft channel, so the views and opinions expressed by myself and Shadab are our own and do not represent the views of Microsoft.
All right, Jimmy. So let's talk about Andy Jassy. He actually wrote a memo and which is published and available on the Amazon website as well. And then as part of our AI code of the week, we'll talk a little bit about what he said. And this particularly actually was in the news, mostly around the impact of AI on the jobs. And then news actually headlines vary across the different publishing houses. Some of them said Amazon is going to do the layoffs, and others said Amazon is cutting more jobs, things like that. But let's talk about what he actually said. So, things like this. For example, he said in one of the paragraph, I quote him, as we roll out more Gen AI and agents, it should change the way our work is done. We will need fewer people doing some of the jobs that are being done today and more people doing other types of jobs. It's hard to know exactly where this nets out over time, but in the next few years, we expect that this will reduce our total corporate workforce as we get efficiency gains from using AI extensively across the company. Unquote. And this was Andy Jassy, of course, the CEO of Amazon. And, I think as you see, right, this is the only paragraph in that entire memo which actually talks about the jobs. But I would say a lot of headlines that news medias were publishing were kind of misleading because he's not talking about immediate layoffs or things like that. He does talk about the way it it will AI is changing our jobs and the way the work is done, and then we will need fewer people doing some of the jobs, but more people doing other types of job, right? So if you can see, he's trying to say that some jobs will change, some jobs will reduce the number of people that you require today, and other jobs may require more people. So I think it's pretty balanced proposition in my view, but I think it went viral, of course, for the wrong reason. And then there's as usual. So it has become like a doomsday nowadays, Jamie. At a slighted hint, people get anxious, and to be honest, rightfully so, because I think some of the companies need to be very, very careful the messaging that they send. Right now, it's a very, very sensitive situation. anywhere the mention of job come. I think there was recently some conference where one of the leaders he said that 40% of the people will be having agent, the 60% will be looking for job by the next year, things like that. Those kind of statements are heavy and they get really viral very quickly. People are tracking these things because it literally impacts lives.
Yeah, and I think I don't know if I'd call it a trend just yet, but we certainly are seeing several prominent CEOs, people in position or power from an operating standpoint, come out to say that, yeah, there's going to be, impact of jobs, or if you're not adapting to AI, your job might be in jeopardy. And or, oh, we're 4 years, 5 years out, looking at how our operational expertise, operational guidelines are going to change based upon what we see today. So, Andy Jassy is just, I kind of look at it as just one of a few CEOs over the last couple of weeks that seem to have come out and talk about this. Now, my point of view on this is that this, and maybe we're just more in tune with how the job market is changing because we see and use AI all the time. But I believe that this has been talked about behind closed doors for probably the last year or so. And now that there's enough advancement and now that there's more awareness, I'm not going to say by everybody, but when we start seeing the news start talking about things and now they're starting to pick up on, oh, this could actually, impact the workforce. And now I think it's to a point where these CEOs, I don't know if I would use the word comfortable, but they're at least more in tune with what they're seeing, and they're kind of laying the groundwork. And again, I don't want to say this is like a forbearance for bad news, 6 months or 12 months down the line, but there is a change afoot. It's very different, depending upon if you're somebody who's doing code development, and we've seen that already. Like some of the shifts in ways that application development is being done. But is this going to be true for everybody in every role? I think we could point to some things, whether or not it's in marketing or HR or code development, that yeah, there might be some impact. So the bottom line is, I think like some of these messages from Andy, and we've seen others as of late as well, kind of point in that direction. So I'm not surprised by this, uh, but it may be a surprise to a lot of other people that may not be so attuned to it. And yeah, to your point, some of the news outlets are picking this up and like, oh, doomsday, all jobs are going to be gone. I don't think that's certainly true, but I think it's a shift in the way that people need to think about opportunities, how they should be aligned with the technology. Again, because I'll always say this, and I know I've said this multiple times on this, on this podcast before, that it's not AI that's going to take your job. It's the person who knows AI. And I think that's certainly true.
That is true. And, there are lots of good things Andy also talked about in that memo. For example, he talked about, he said that quote, technologies like Gen AI are rare. They come about once in a lifetime and completely change what's possible for customers and businesses, unquote. And I agree. I mean, to be honest, although in our lifetime, I think the few technologies that have come about, which have like totally impacted, like for example, internet, mobile, and for example, of course, Gen AI. I think these are definitely some of those which have totally changed. Even I would say like robots also, right? The autonomous cars, etc., is also foundational and fundamentally changing. But anyway, he talks about like he gives several examples of how the Gen AI is actually changing things in the company today. He talked about, for example, the shopping features like Lens, where you actually point the camera and take a picture, and then based on that you search for the item in the shopping result. Or you can say buy for me. Basically, you ask the shopping agent to buy an item on another merchant's website if it is not available on the Amazon, or even recommended site. I think this feature is really good. Like for example, the size recommendation. Many times I mess up when buying things, and in terms of the fit and size and across the different brands, it changes so much. Sometimes it's hard, right? L for one brand is totally different for the L for another one. Even it like so, like it can AI can actually help choose the right fitting and the size across the brand, right? That would be amazing. So he does talk about these really good examples, but of course, one of them got sensationalized. Not that it is not a concern. I'm not downplaying that, but I think it was a bit it wasn't really the intent of that memo particularly. Of course there will be some jobs which will be impacted, and of course there will be some other jobs, although nobody is able to give an idea about what those new jobs will look like. That is the only thing, JP. That's the only thing that worries me. But everybody seems to say, hey, something will happen good.
Yeah, kind of think we should use AI to help us figure out what those new jobs are going to be.
That's true. The prompt engineer role is like dead. Everybody now knows that it
Yeah.
doesn't work that way.
So let's get into some news articles or news some news. I'm kind of smiling a little bit because when I looked at this first one, um, I was thinking about how can I relate this to something that sparks futuristic thought. So, if anyone has seen Terminator, you know the whole concept of Skynet. Skynet is, these self-aware machines, and they've kind of taken over the world. Not to say this next news article is that, but it sort of started me thinking down that line. So, without further ado, so MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, has actually devised a way for large language models to learn on their own. Is that the beginning of Skynet? Not really sure, but it's pretty cool nonetheless. So they've come up with a cool name, by the way. It's called SEAL, for Self Adapting Language Model. And as I said, the whole intent here is that the language model learns on its own. How does it do that? Well, it actually involves the ability for the language model to learn based upon synthetic training data and update its own base model based upon that training data. So when you peel this back a little bit, actually what SEAL does is it generates new insights and then folds that into its weights and parameters in the model itself. And if you think about this, is that if a model starts to see a prompt, right? And a great example that they gave was actually challenges faced by the Apollo space program. So you could actually have the model generate some answers like, hey, what was the challenge? It'll come up with a passage, and then it tries to describe the implications of that particular statement, the output. And then it uses that to determine, well, how would somebody, a person actually write that and review it? So what the system does is it actually automatically creates data, in this case, sample passages, and uses that to determine a set of answers to questions. So it basically is doing reinforcement learning on the fly to provide back to the model and improve its abilities on, well, how well did I answer this question? In this case, in this example, was the Apollo space program. How well did I answer that based upon my improved model, comparing it to the old one? So it is literally doing its own reinforcement learning. So the MIT researchers, again, have done this. They've used it against the two open source models, that being Meta's Llama as well as Alibaba's Qwen model. So it's basically small and medium sized versions of these two different open source models, and they've been able to actually get it to work. They do say that, take the same approach, the same research methods that they used against the Llama model and the Qwen model, that they could do this against the larger frontier models that are out there. So, we'll see where this goes. But to me, this is interesting. We can get self-learning models and they'll get better and better on their own as they determine, hey, this is something that I could use based upon your query. So interesting stuff.
Sounds pretty cool. I think because this is one of the inability of the current language models, and if this works, it's really good actually.
Yep.
Let's talk about some of the new efforts in passing the bills and laws related to the AI. So this time it's the New York's turn. Now, New York state lawmakers have passed a bill that aims to prevent frontier AI models from these leading labs in contributing to the disaster scenarios, including the death or injury of more than 100 people or more than $1 billion in damages. Now, if it is signed into law, this AI safety bill would require the world's largest AI labs to publish thorough safety and security reports on their frontier AI models. And this bill will require the AI labs to then report safety incidents, such as any concerning AI model behavior or bad actors stealing an AI model, should they happen, right? So there is some sort of onus, of course, on the leading labs. It is not as I would say draconian in terms of how the SB 1047 was in California, which was ultimately vetoed by Governor Newsom. Now, in this case, however, if tech companies fail to live up to these standards, this act, which is called, actually, this acronym is RAISE, this RAISE Act empowers the New York's Attorney General to bring civil penalties of up to $30 million. I would say it's modest in terms of the penalties compared to the other ones, and I think it is something I would say. Uh, I think we need these kind of guardrails, right? There has to be some sort of uh, penalization of failing to make these things safe, because otherwise things can get go rogue. Now the only thing is that I don't know whether these kind of bills, what are the future of these bills, because the big beautiful bill kind of like is going to stop the states having their own laws, it will penalize them if they try to pass their own law. So what will happen, we don't know. It has to go to the governor, who has to then sign the bill, etc. But this was an effort so far.
Yeah, I mean, this is interesting. I don't know. It to me, it gets. I don't know where overreach from states or even the federal government at that matter to these companies. I do think there needs to be some sort of oversight. I don't. I'd have to look at this bill in more details in depth. But like, how does one determine what is a safety incident? Like, is my definition different than yours? How does that then transcribe or transcend itself between OpenAI, Microsoft, Meta? Do they have each different definition? So hopefully this bill does have some standard definitions of what are incidents and what is a disaster scenario. I don't know. I'd like to see where this goes. So you did say this passed the lawmaker, right? So
Yeah,
it's
but not
still not a
signed
law.
into
It's
law
not
yet.
a law yet, right?
Yeah, not signed into law yet.
Yeah. And then if this does get put into law, will other states implement something similar? I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, I'm sure, if this passes, California is going to go back to what they were trying to do, but maybe water it down or something. But we'll see, what will happen. Um, the thing is that it's hard, to be honest. It's hard to say at this point of time what the position would look like. It would be easier in the future to look at the past and say, yes, this was the right step, or no, it wasn't right this step. The thing is, I'm becoming a little bit more on the side that, given this mad race of AI models, etc., look, we only know people like organizations like OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, and others. We don't know what we don't know, right? For example, remember, dark web is larger than the actual internet that we know, right? Which means that there could be a lot of these dark companies trying to do this kind of stuff. Um, I don't know if they can be still tamed by these kind of laws or not, but I'm hoping that some efforts can be tamed by these kind of bills. So time will tell, uh, but we'll find out whether the governor signs this into bill or not.
Hmm. Yep.
And on the other side, here's a little paradox, Jamie. One of the profession which is under threat is actually legal, right? Because of the AI, to be honest. But I think looks like because of AI, they will have more demands, more lawsuits getting filed. So it's going to be a bit paradoxical. We'll see who will win, and maybe it will net out overall. But here is another one, right? A legal, I would say, the effect. The New York Times actually had sued OpenAI earlier in terms of the IP copyrights, etc. They claim that they have trained the model using their content, etc. Now that litigation is still going on, but in the meantime, they've actually won in the interim a demand to have the OpenAI log all the outputs, um, you know, like keeping them, retaining them, which could be used for determining the outcome of this ongoing litigation. And they have been granted that, which means that now the OpenAI actually has to keep the logs of those outputs from the chat GPT. Now, there are certain exemptions, and this does impact some of the corporates, because I know there are a lot of corporates who are pretty sensitive about it. And this has been one of the things, right? They generally, a lot of the legal department and the procurement department, they have given the approval to use these AI models on the condition that there is a guarantee that the output and the input will not be retained and that data will not be used to train these models. Now, in this case, that does create a little bit of a friction here because now the OpenAI has to retain that. Now, of course, they are taking some mitigations. For example, this is going to be stored only in a legal cloud where it will not be available for general access. They will keep that protected. They will also, for example, I think there are certain contracts which has in it like a zero data retention agreement, and that will still be exempted. They do not have to retain logs for those contracts. And then also, it does not apply to ChatGPT Enterprise or ChatGPT Education or API users with zero data retention agreement. So there are certain exemptions, but overall, this is a bit of a setback for OpenAI. And I think some of the customers may find it probably not acceptable and they may be looking at other options. Now, interestingly, this doesn't seem to impact some of the reseller. For example, the Azure OpenAI may not be actually impacted or required to retain this. So it's a complex litigation that will go on for a while. Of course, OpenAI is going to challenge it, but for now, they have to retain it until they win that appeal.
Yeah, obviously there would be a lot of unhappy end users if they know that um, their prompts and responses and anything that they're doing through ChatGPT is going to store it. I know one thing: if this truly does go through and the order isn't dropped, is that that database is going to be really big. Um,
That is true.
so
Um,
So hopefully that lands on the Microsoft database or Cosmos DB. But anyway, yeah,
that,
we'll see where this goes. I mean, this will obviously, I think, also set a precedent. And I'm wondering if this does go through, does this then also potentially get applied to Gemini? Does this get applied to
you're
uh,
absolutely right. I mean, this would be precedent if they do win this, because there are certain litigations against other companies as well, including Google, for example. So it definitely, it's not just going to impact OpenAI. You're absolutely right. And again, this is not a final victory, right? This is an interim injunction given that you have to retain it. 'Cause it's more like it will be analyzed, right, for the determination of the final.
yeah,
But
and to your point, I'm sure this will be still hung up in the courts for, not days, not weeks, but probably months as things get fought. So
correct. But until then, the data has to be retained. That's a problem. That's the problem that
yeah,
OpenAI has to deal with. But of course, there are mitigations, like you can have a zero data retention agreement with them, or you can also still use the Azure OpenAI because they are not impacted with this
right.
order. So same model, you can still go around it.
So, in some quick rapid fire news, real quick, YouTube Shorts are actually going to be getting the ability to use VO3 later on the summer. So, VO2 was there for Shorts, but now it'll be upgraded to the VO3. The question, though, still remains: is there going to be a fee against that? So, we'll find out over the next couple of months. We were talking about Andy Jassy and opening up, and with his quote, this kind of goes in line with that. So, Amazon and Microsoft are talking about shrinking its workforce, both now and potentially in the future. And the key thing to that is they're citing, widespread adoption of Gen AI tools, which boosts efficiency and is allowing both of those companies, I'm sure, as well as others, to cut costs where possible. So the other quick fire news
Maybe
here.
what would that mean? Like, but I just want to assure our listener that no matter what happens to us, we will still be doing this podcast. Okay.
We'll still have this podcast for sure. Um, so one last thing for me, at least, these smartphones, and yes, this is an iPhone. I've been patiently waiting for Siri to get its upgrade to using AI, and that's definitely not happening anytime soon. So Apple came out to say that Siri will not get its AI facelift until spring of next year. So roughly, a year from now, probably. And they cited a couple of different things. One, the organizational changes, some of the, who's leading what groups, but then also the development timelines, I guess a little bit more difficult than they thought to change around Siri, which I'm not sure why it's taking that long, but it is. So yeah, if you're waiting for Siri to get smarter, you're still waiting.
Everything is a priority except AI for Apple, Jimmy.
Yeah.
So, by the way, OpenAI drops Scale AI as a data provider following the Meta deal. Not unexpectedly. And not just OpenAI, actually, Google is also considering that. In fact, Scale AI was actually being used by multiple companies. So, all of them might consider the deals again because Meta is trying to acquire that. Now, Sam Altman also mentioned that Meta has been trying to actually poach their talent from OpenAI with offer up to even $100 million, and that's just a sign-in bonus. Jamie, of course, it will be multi-year, but sign-in bonus, $100 million.
Pick
I,
me.
I'm having. I had to like. I have to tell my kids that okay, let's reconsider all the career plans.
Yeah.
I was telling my daughter, look, it's a sign-in bonus.
Yeah.
Okay. um, but the problem is that then they looked at me that what are you doing? Right? I said, look, I missed my bus. Okay, there's no way I can go back to the do the research. But a lot of them are researchers, right, in this area. But I think there are lots of other, not just this. Like right now, there's a lot of focus on the research, but of course, there is. It's like I would say, Jimmy, it feels like a California gold rush. A lot of people, I think it is still for years to come, there is still going to be a lot of opportunity. People have to find themselves in the right place with the right skill, and a lot of careers will be made, a lot of careers will be destroyed.
Yeah.
People have to find a way out. This is and there is no like a there are some guidelines, there are some directions in which you can go about it, but still it's a exploratory field.
Yeah. I like the way you put it as a gold rush, but
Yeah, and by the way, Meta on this news, um, Meta is also actually trying to not just they bought, of course, they're basically investing in Scale AI. They poached their CEO Alexander Wong to actually lead their effort on super intelligence. They also actually tried to code Ilya. They actually wanted to they buy the safe superintelligence, that company that Ilya had formed. And then they tried to actually poach Ilya. And now they're actually trying to work with their other co-founder, Daniel Gross, okay, who basically, founded a company Q search engine, which was sold to Apple. And he's also actually one of the pioneer. He's an AI investor, and he's a co-founder in the safe superintelligence with Ilya. And they're trying to get him as well. Not just that, they actually also try to buy Perplexity. It's going crazy. Jamie, Meta is going crazy. That
they're
they're raising all the bars and they're trying to just now in a rush to actually on a shopping spree, really,
uh,
right?
so you want
So
the reason why I think they're going through a shopping spree and putting up these
tell me
six
about it.
um, I think they fell short with Llama, and Zuckerberg's got let's just say a complexity about him where he doesn't like to lose, and I think he lost a little bit of face of Llama not performing as well as some of these other
True.
companies frontier models. So if you can't beat them, buy them. You know
True. When you
that's
have money,
kind of what
definitely
I'm
buy them. I totally agree. I think that's one of the reasons that they want to actually get to super intelligence or AGI
saying.
faster than others and not be beaten again. But I think the another aspect of this is that also they do feel that these AI apps can potentially turn into more like social media, right? So his current business, for example, Facebook is actually declining, right? um, and in fact, OpenAI, Sam Altman has actually talked about it, right? Because Meta actually tried to create their own AI app just like ChatGPT. So Sam Altman said, okay, we will try to create our own social media. But I think there's a convergence that is coming between the AI apps and models and then the social media network. I have a feeling that he's trying to buy Perplexity because it could become a modern social media equivalent kind of thing, right? Maybe that app can be turned into a network, right? So I think that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to build a Chat GPT alike, and
It could
Perplexity
even
is one of
it
the
could even
candidates.
be it could even be bigger than a social networking piece. I mean, what was it, 2 episodes or 3 episodes ago? We talked about how Perplexity is getting into the operating system with the browser and it becoming more.
Yep.
So, it kind of dovetails in that, super intelligence, more than just a chat app. It's the way that we interact with anything and everything with AI. So anyway, could be part of the reason why he's got some grander schemes. We got to figure out how to way to get some of those 7-figure, 8-figure, whatever it is, signing bonuses there. We need a little piece of that gold rush.
Yep.
So, um, any more news for us? Rapid fire. That one
Oh
was.
yeah. By the way, one interesting item, Jamie. I know you and I, we both love it, and you have done the demos also on this audio overview, aka podcast version of things. You can throw a document into this notebook LM, and then this was so popular and so liked. Now, actually, Google is trying to bring that audio overviews for the search queries as well. So if you make a search query, you will be able to create a very like a mini podcast version of it to consume that information, because it's very interesting way to consume that information.
That's cool. I'll have to try it out actually. So let's get into some launches, or at least some news on launches. So Midjourney, we actually kind of just touched upon Midjourney a little bit. Um, so Midjourney is launching a video model. So what's interesting about this is if you read, and by the way, we'll put this in the show notes, and you can go, pick up the website. But what's interesting is the way that Midjourney framed why they're building a video model. It's not that they want to build the video model. Sounds strange, right? That's not their end goal. Their end goal is to create this immersive 3D real-time simulation world in a way that you get there. Start out with imaging, which they've done, and I would argue, they were the ones that did it best. Maybe not now. We've got a lot of great imaging capabilities, whether it's from Google or OpenAI with their image model. But at least for Midjourney, they said, well, our starting point is the image. Our end goal is this 3D rendering real time simulation world. But the way that we're going to get there is to take a step to build videos. And that's what they've done. It's actually pretty cool. I went out to their website and looked at obviously the things that they've generated. But if you know Midjourney, you could see like what other people have generated. It's sort of like this gallery, and there's some really cool videos that are already out there. So what you could generate is 5-second videos, and you could stitch multiple of those together, and basically create a 20-second video by doing 4 of these. By the way, you can only do this on Discord. So if you're a Midjourney user, you know that they have a website, which I think their website only came out like a year ago. You had to do everything through Discord to create imaging, and it wasn't necessarily so much user friendly, I would say. But again, for the video, you do need to go to Discord. I would assume that that's going to come out on the website soon. So in direct competition, this obviously competes with Sora, competes with Runway, Gen 4, Firefly, obviously Google's VO3, which was just introduced at I/O. So it's squarely in that space. And as I said before, the videos are pretty good from what I've seen. So what's interesting is that Midjourney is focusing on the ability to use V1, their video one model, for creativity over commercial use. And I say that because there was, and we talked about this last time, uh, people have already started creating commercials, like literally commercials, using things like VO3. So this is more about creativity. It's sort of like, how can we as in consumers create videos for more of this like real time open world simulation? And again, it kind of goes back to my point that their plans don't stop with video. It's about creating this 3D world that I guess we would all interact with. So anyway, that's their future plans. All this comes at while they're being sued by Disney and Universal for copyright infringement. So you kind of have this like, hey, Midjourney is pushing ahead and not stopping with imaging, but at the same time, you got to keep that in the back of your head that there's this big lawsuit and on the image side. So I don't know how this may impact V1, if anything at all, on the video generation. So what I did find interesting, if you go out to Midjourney's site, they have the big announcement of this video model, which by the way, we're recording this on the 20th of June. And the video model was just released 2 days ago. Already, Midjourney has come up with some best practices. Oh, if you're doing this with the video, an example there is like it costs more, obviously, to use the video generation. It's actually cost 8 times as much as if you were doing image generation. But they have 2 different levels. They kind of call it the slow movement, and I'm trying to remember exactly how they call it, but they have what I'll kind of equate like a draft or a not as fluid as movement on the video versus like real time animation stuff. So these are things where Midjourney is coming out and giving some guidance because they've seen just in the last 48 hours a huge uptick on the number of people that are generating these things and providing some guidance on, oh, if you don't want this to cost this much, tweak the output of your model. So overall feedback is very positive. Like I said, I've seen some of the output on the gallery. They look pretty good and they're kind of compelling, just like VO3 or Sora is. So
I think
that's the journey.
it's just a reminder from Midjourney they still exist and they're still doing things. They're just trying to remind us.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. So another launch is another model from Google, another one within the Gemini lineup. So this one is the Gemini 2.5 Flash-Lite. These model names are getting so long, especially with Gemini. But this is actually a pretty good, pretty new model. This one's obviously highly optimized for efficiency. It's really a streamlined model that's focused on high volume, low latency, cost sensitive tasks. So this is positioned as the most affordable member of the Gemini 2.5 family. And if you remember on the family, this is where 2.5 Pro, which arguably right now is actually the most capable frontier model for both reasoning, and it also has that completion is capable within it. But they've got the 2.5 Pro, 2.5 Flash, and then Flash-Lite. Sounds like what it is. It's a light version of it. So as I said before,
there'll be Flash-Lite Nano also coming very soon, James.
Yeah, exactly.
Just to screw up our minds.
Yeah. So fast response, that's really what it's optimized for. It's got thinking mode enabled. So unlike earlier lightweight models, the Flash-Lite includes a thinking mode. So that obviously improves quality, of the output because it is putting a reasoning layer on top of that. It does have tool integration support for things like search and code execution. So again, it makes it more versatile than other typical lightweight models. It is multimodal as well, so it accepts text, image, video, audio, and PDFs, and it has output in text format. Again, that kind of keeps the cost down. It is able to handle 1 million token as far as input and 64,000 on an output. So if you kind of compare some things between the 2.0 Flash-Lite and the 2.5, obviously, like I said, the data types for input are the same except for PDF. So that's new in the 2.5 version. The number of tokens is actually the same for input tokens, but it's the output tokens that is improved upon. They actually went from 8,000 tokens to 64,000 tokens on output. The other thing too is that the knowledge cutoff is more up to date. So this knowledge cutoff is January of 2025. And as I said, tool use, you didn't have that capability within the 2.0 version of Flash-Lite. They now has, as I said before, the ability for search and code execution. And this is really good for high volume, low cost, and low latency tasks. And I didn't mention this already, but it's available through Vertex API, Vertex AI, the Gemini API, as well as within the Google AI Studio. So pretty broad ability for its use.
Google has thought up well, Jimmy, overall, if you see there. It's a good reminder of how you can fumble in the beginning, but don't give up. You can still make up and then come back to the leading edge, right? Anthropic also came out of nowhere and really did amazing thing. I think Apple is trying to tell us that, hey, guys, not just in a couple of years, we will show that in 5 years' time. So they're waiting, and then they prove that, hey, we will come from behind and take the leading edge.
Yeah, definitely. I would certainly say that Google, at least it seems like over the last 3 months, has just been like one announcement, one release after another. So
Correct.
they definitely have caught up.
True. Okay, not to forget what Microsoft is also doing. Let's talk about a couple of things which are particularly relevant. Of course, most of the things that we talk about when comes to OpenAI, all those are available in Microsoft Azure. But Microsoft just talked about some advancements in the quantum error correction with a family of new four-dimensional codes. Okay, so what happens is this: like quantum computing really requires, you have physical qubits, and then on top of that, you virtualize and make the logical qubits. Now, the this whole quantum computing is inherently very prone to errors because it's very unstable state. To be in the quantum state is very unstable. It's not like bits, and which means that you need to constantly detect and correct the errors. And that's what the advancement is about. It's about using these new geometric four-dimensional error correction codes, which can be applied, and then that would reduce the error 1,000 times. And that's really the breakthrough. So what is happening is that because of that, it makes the quantum computing at the lower level more reliable, more resilient. What Microsoft has done is they are actually collaborating with atom computing. They have their like neutral atom qubits, like physical, and then on top of that, you can virtualize and create the logical qubits using the Microsoft Quantum platform, and then you apply these error correction codes. So these all things combined creates a very, I would say, stable and less error, minimal error in the quantum computing. So much so that it can be actually practically used. That's really the advancement. Now, beyond that, Jamie, don't ask me any question because quantum is a field that even the quantum professor, as they famously say, nobody understands it. I don't understand it, to be honest, right? I only understand bits and pieces, and I cannot explain a lot of it. But this should be enough for our listeners, I think.
Yeah, I guess the bottom line is computers are getting smarter, and our ability to do, quantum physics and capabilities are catching up. So to me, this is, like you just said, it's sort of magic in the box. And to me, the output is that if we're really able to do quantum computing, then the sky's the limit on what we can unlock. That's the way I look at it.
Yep. And you can see this. All I can understand is there is a donut with some sprinkles here. That's, I think, should be good enough for me to understand. But this is how that 4D rotation of the error code looks like, and how it reduces the error.
Cool.
Okay.
Sounds good.
One more thing, actually, from Microsoft, there's a new announcement about the sovereign cloud. So there are some new announcements related to sovereign cloud availability within Europe. And sovereign cloud itself is not a new, but now this is actually available in the Europe area. So there are multiple aspects to it. So let me just quickly explain. So you see that there is something called sovereign public cloud. Sovereign public cloud is essentially where you basically, it's like a progression or expansion of the Microsoft cloud for sovereignty, and it is offered across all existing European data center regions. All the regions are qualified; they all will become sovereign public cloud. And for for example, Azure or Microsoft 365, Microsoft Security, Power Platform, all of them will become sovereign. And the way this sovereign public cloud is achieved is basically to ensure that the customer data stays in Europe under European law and under the operations and control by the European personnel. And there is a full encryption and full control of customers. So there are particularly two, three key aspects here to achieve that sovereign public cloud. So one of them is like this new thing that Microsoft has launched called Data Guardian. Now, Data Guardian are essentially is for the European operation, which means that any access to the European cloud is controlled by the European personnel. So let's say if there is, let's say in case there are there is some access required by the engineers outside Europe, but that access will be controlled by the European personnel. So there are like guardians who basically are guarding and making sure that only required and authorized access is given to the European cloud. That's one thing. And this is public cloud I'm talking about. The other aspect is the external key management. So the key doesn't need to be, key is basically going to be available in the private part of the cloud. So it's like external key management for the customer control encryption. So it's like external key management to operate in those sovereign public cloud. Those are the two main, I would say, reason how it becomes a sovereign public cloud. Now, there's something called sovereign private cloud. Sovereign private cloud is essentially hybrid, right? So it could include your some of the cloud in the, for example, it like on premise, local. There's something called Azure Local, which basically is a your own hardware but enabled with certain Microsoft or Azure local components, and that makes it Azure local. So you control a large part of that hardware. Now, Microsoft 365, which is basically the Words and Excel and SharePoint and Outlook, all of that is now available on the Azure local. They can actually basically M365 local as well as Azure local. So both of them together become part of the sovereign private cloud, right? Um, and then there is something called national partner cloud, which is basically some localized partnership to provide the cloud capabilities in a particular country. For example, France. So there is a joint venture between a company, Blue and Capgemini in France. They are operating a cloud, and then Microsoft is collaborating with that company, and that is what is offered. But that's limited to the French geography only. So that's why it is a nationalized partner cloud, partner in partnership with others as well. Similarly, I think for Germany as well. Right now, I think it's for Germany and the France in the European region. Similarly, they can expand it to other countries as well. So this is overall the kind of recent announcement made. Now, why does it matter to the AI? Because particularly in the Europe, there has been a lot of concern about the GDPR, the data, and what AI will do. AI can actually create more exposure and threat surface, etc. So there is a lot of interest in making sure that it remains protected. Now, this sovereignty of the cloud, whether it's a sovereign private cloud or public cloud or the national partner cloud, can assure some of the customers when they want to use the AI and things like that, right? So it's a step in that direction, and I think people are becoming more concerned about the data boundaries, residency, and things like that. And sovereign cloud kind of try to assure them that.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's, I guess I look at this as for regions or countries that have some privacy concerns or rules that govern it, this avails them another option, at least with Microsoft, to allow that protection. Bottom
Yep.
line. So let's switch gears a little bit. One of the one of the sections that we have within this podcast is to talk about companies within AI. So this is a company that's been in the news quite often in the last couple of weeks, and I would probably argue that not a lot of people even heard of this company prior to the last couple of weeks. And the company I'm talking about is Scale AI. I think we might have just mentioned it a couple of minutes ago. But so, who is Scale AI? What do they do? Why are they important? And why is Meta willing to shell out $14 billion for them? Especially if you're like, like I just said, like, who is this company? So Scale AI, believe it or not, it's been around for almost 10 years. They were formed in 2016, so 9 years as a company based in San Francisco. So the company Scale AI is all about data labeling. And why is that important? Well, data labeling is all about how to prepare data for use in and by the models and how they get trained. So what Scale AI does, at least what they set out to do initially, was to label data that would be used by these models to train the models. So they went out and hired a bunch of people, like literally people. So Scale AI, yeah, at least initially, wasn't a company that did AI. They were a company that labeled data. And so what they did is they hired a bunch of teams and organizational structure to have humans annotate the the data, and that could be like tagging images, text, label audio, and other data, so it could be used to train these machine learning models. And let me give you an example because it's probably still a little unclear. So the reason why Scale AI is so important to the whole AI ecosystem is that it allows those different frontier models to actually train their model. So if you think about it this way, if you're a student, right, you're learning something, you need information or examples to be clear to learn a new concept. Same thing is true for these AI models. They need data that is at a level where it could be understood by that model. So what they do, and again, what Scale AI does is they look at data across all these different pieces and they assign information to it. They assign metadata. They assign labeling, right? So when these models from, let's say, OpenAI or Llama or Gemini, they use that information to help discern what they're actually looking at to build in the model itself. So why this becomes so important, without Scale AI, you wouldn't have a GPT 4 or 4.1. You wouldn't have a Gemini 2.5. You wouldn't have a Llama. You wouldn't have a Mistral. You kind of get where I'm going with this. So this becomes like the underpinning for training these models. So why is this so important? Well, again, it kind of goes by the fact that if they didn't do, if let me put it this way, if one of those frontier models had to spend their time doing this labeling, then they wouldn't have actual time to focus on doing the model design, the deployment, building the tools that we know and love from whether it's Google. Like you wouldn't have a VO3 is what I'm getting at, right? They would spend most of their time doing the labeling. So the fact that we have a company like Scale AI spending the time for humans to do the labeling, that enables these frontier models to do what they're doing. So now Scale AI obviously started the way I just said. They had humans, looking at and tagging, labeling these different pieces of data, but they didn't stop there. So they've actually expanded beyond just their basic labeling. So they do model evaluation, safety checks. They even do RLHF, the reinforcement learning from human feedback. So they even do that as well. So they're offering more than just the data labeling, but that's where they started. So with that backdrop, you could understand why Meta wanted to shell out, the $14 billion that they did for, a almost majority stake. It's 49%. And you could also understand why, Meta wanted to bring over Alexander Wang, the Scale AI's founder, because he's got this, the concepts and the understanding of data labeling. You could also understand why, um, companies like OpenAI and Google are stepping away from Scale AI because, all right, well, now it's being owned by Meta, and I would argue that Meta is going to have a real advantage here if they're if Scale AI is going to be solely focused on generating the next set of training data that would be used by Llama. So anyway, that's what Scale AI is. That's why it's so important. I kind of treat it as it's the underpinning for all the models that we're used to using today.
Yeah, and its CEO is, I think, already one of the youngest billionaire, and he's pretty active. I think the guy will do some, I would say, big things in the future. He's very ambitious, but it sounds like data sweatshop to me, for the frontier AI models, right? A lot
Right.
of labeling had to be done manually, but I think now they have the platforms and the tools. The other thing is, of course, this creates an opportunity for other labeling firms, and there are other competing firms like Labelbox, for example, and I think the few others as well, who are suddenly having a possibility of a windfall, right? Because all these, the OpenAI and the Google and others, all are looking for the alternates now. Whoever is competing against Meta will look forward to. So we'll see what the future of the scale AI will look like. If the other leading labs step back, then what will happen to that real scale AI? Will it scale across company, or will it just become the
Yeah.
um, Meta's own private shop? That's all.
Meta scale.
Yes, scaling Meta rather. Um, okay, perfect. Jamie, if somebody wants to, let's say, want to prove that they understand AI, what kind of endorsements, etc., would be useful for them to show to build their career, for the AI jobs that we have been often talking about?
So there are certifications out there. So from Microsoft, there's a cert called AI 900, which is allows people to show that they've got um, knowledge with AI. The great thing about that cert, by the way, yes, it's from Microsoft, but if you go through the training curriculum, there's online learning, there's obviously training partners, and then you go take the actual exam. But it grounds you in what I'm going to call a vendor neutral foundational structure for understanding artificial intelligence, like what is machine learning, computer vision, what is NLP, like all the things that we talk about. It's part of that quote unquote certification. So you need to understand those core things, and obviously there it ties it back to Azure, whether or not it's using the cognitive services or Azure ML or things like with agents, but it's got those core pieces. So that's something that I would think is useful for anybody in those core pieces. The other thing too is like if you're going through like something like the AZ 900, or I'm sorry, the AZAI 900 certification, you're going to be able to actually talk effectively, because whether or not it's an organization that is using Microsoft technology or not, you still have these grounded foundational pieces. So you'll be able to not only do cross team collaboration and speak with others, but it'll accelerate onboarding that you might do as it relates to getting onto a team or working with others. And obviously also signifies your commitment to continual learning. So if you're going into a Microsoft shop or an organization that leverages those tools, it'll show that, hey, I've got initiative and I've taken the discipline seriously around use of AI tools, and you're not just quote unquote playing around with technology. You have the ability to show what your skill set is, and you've proven that by taking an exam, and obviously also boost credibility with customers or maybe even future employers, that I have the skill and it's been certified through a third party for that. And it just lays the groundwork for things that you would learn. So I would say, yeah, if you're curious about AI, hopefully you are. Otherwise, you won't be listening to this, these these episodes with us with the AI files. But it shows that you're not only curious about AI, but committed to understanding and showing that you do have those core concepts, being able to map them, in this case, to Azure capabilities or services, and then showing that you're able to use that in the real world.
True. And I think, Jamie, to add to that point, you know, AI 900 is a great certification to show because it is foundational. It's not that difficult. I know some people who are actually high school students who have also taken it. So, right, it's not that difficult, but it lays the foundation. It tells the world that you are keen and you want to build a career, and this is a great endorsement on your resume. Um, by the way, just quick commercial information on that. I think it costs about probably $99, or maybe it has changed a little bit, but it is still relatively more affordable. It is part of a 900 series of certifications in Azure, and some of the others are, for example, DP 900, which is like for data platform, and there is a AZ 900, which is like foundational Azure, like overall cloud AZ 900. The good thing about this 900 series of certifications is that they don't need to be renewed every year. This is like, you once you take it, it remains for a while. Like associate level certifications, you have to actually renew every year, right? So, 900, I would definitely recommend people to take them. Easier to find, cheaper to take. In fact, if you have actually a corporate program like ESI, Enterprise Skilling Initiative, if you are a EA customer with Microsoft, your organization might already have an access to ESI portal from Microsoft. Look for that. There are still the certifications are most likely still available at 50% cost. It used to be free actually, but last year it changed. So if your organization is already registered with Microsoft, take advantage of that and take the certification at 50% cost. Okay. Well, since we're talking about the career, I wanted to actually show this week, Jamie, an example of prompt of the week, and this is actually preparing for the interviews. So, my daughter actually, this is a personal and live example. My daughter had an interview this week, and she's home for the summer. She's a freshman in the college, doing the business, and she wants to get some retail experience. So she applied to Burlington Coat Factory. As a stockist, there was a position, and she has no idea about this position. She doesn't even do laundry at home. Forget folding at these doing all this stockist job at the Burlington Coat Factory. So I suggested her to use the AI, and she used the Copilot and ChatGPT a lot. So she did, and here is an example of what you can potentially ask. Right, if you're going to run into a interview, no matter whether you have the experience or not, you can actually help prepare. And if you do that, you see that how ChatGPT can actually help you understand the what is the typical job description of that role. It also will give you tips on how to prepare the potential questions, and you can see some glimpse here. It gave you sample questions that what potentially may be asked as part of that interview process, and potential answer as well. Because you can also say that, look, my daughter, for example, in her prompt, she said, I have no experience with this role whatsoever. So suggest me how to handle this interview. And it gave the tip. It also even gave the tips on grooming, how to go, how to keep composure, and pretty good, I would say. And finally, it says, "Let's go." So I would say pretty good tips. Actually, it's a good prompt if you're running into any interview or any interview like situation. Please do rehearse using this tool, using the AI wherever you can.
Sounds good. Yeah, I love these prompts of the week. I actually used them myself. So these are great, especially preparing for an interview, for new folks coming in, or if just people are changing roles, like we talked about before. So
Absolutely. And we'll continue to talk about such prompts in the future. But that's it for today.
yep, it's a wrap, as we call it. Thanks again, Chirag. Have a good weekend.
You too. Enjoy the week, Jimmy, and bye, everyone. Keep listening. Bye
Thank
bye.
you.